You'd have to be watching the fake news BBC or living on Elon Musk's Mars mission to not know that Britain is going to hell in a handcart. This calamity, the fall of Britain, the fall of England, is being presided over by a governing elite who hate our country. Welcome to the home of the counter-revolution. Welcome to the Liz Truss Show.
Stunned silence there.
Stunned silence. Liz Truss 3.0, indefatigable, shameless to a large degree. The world may have moved on, but I'm not sure Liz has.
Well, look, we're all doing political broadcasting via podcasts, and obviously you can watch it on YouTube as well. So it's great to welcome another plucky new entrant to the crowded world of political audio-visual media. So welcome, Liz. Good luck.
I have had the honour of once being accused of being part of the British establishment by Liz Truss, the establishment that undermined her and ruined and ended her career, which I'm still not sure how I should take to this day. But there you go.
She once spread round an entire party that I was going to be the next director of communications for Number 10 and was a biased journalist, which...
For Tory Number 10 or a Labour Number 10?
A Tory.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no, sorry, a Labour Number 10. I'm trying to remember which party it was now. It changes so often, but that I was also part of the establishment and therefore part of the stitch-up.
Well,
but,
Liz Truss, despite me writing a very unfavourable review of her book, still follows me on Twitter. So I suppose I'm the only person here who's part of the counter-revolution.
Welcome to The State of It, the politics podcast from The Times and The Sunday Times. I'm Stephen Swinford, the political editor of The Times.
I'm Caroline Wheeler, the political editor of The Sunday Times.
And I'm Patrick Maguire, chief political commentator of The Times, unaccompanied for once in my life by my close friend, my dear friend and professional partner, Gabriel Pogrund, who is off this week and very much missed.
He'll be back next week, though.
I hope so.
Well, look, this week is all about comebacks, and most of it is about one woman. We are going to be talking to you about Angela Rayner, the former Deputy Prime Minister, who is gearing herself up for a very public return to frontline politics. And then we're going to talk about Keir Starmer and what on earth is he going to do for the next 5 months, his 5-month battle for survival. But let's kick off with Angela Rayner and her strategy here. So I want to start with a counterfactual. I want to start with that moment where she had just been sacked and she had left, and one of the people around her got a call, and they got a call from ITV, and it was from the producers of I'm A Celebrity, and they said, we're going to make you an offer. We can't refuse. Well, they didn't put it quite like that. They said, we're going to pay you a lot more than Matt Hancock was ever paid.
Which are a couple of $100,000, right?
The enormous sum, right? So a lot more than he was ever paid. You are worth more than a Hancock.
Nigel.
Yes, not as much as Nigel.
Wow.
To go on I'm A Celebrity, to eat kangaroos' testicles, cockroaches, whatever else is it. Will you do it? And Angela Rayner thought about it. She did weigh it up for a bit. And then she said, no, because I'm not finished and I'm going to come back. And that is what she has been quietly working on for the last few months and is now coming into public view. She's got one more hurdle to get over, which is she needs to settle her bill with HMRC. She needs to pay her taxes. But once that is out the way, if indeed there is a tax bill to pay for this outstanding stamp duty that she owed and admitted that she'd made an error on, she hopes that the path will be clear for her to come back to frontline politics. Now, whether that's cabinet or as Labour leader, we'll see.
I'm genuinely told she hasn't made a decision about what she wants to do because, she's been fairly burnt by what's happened, as anybody would be, basically leaving cabinet, effectively in disgrace, although there are many people, perhaps even in the party, that feel some sympathy for the circumstances in which she had to leave cabinet. And if you remember both the resignation letter and the letter that Sir Keir Starmer sent in response, it was fairly modest stuff. But at the same time, there has been lots of speculation that there could be a deal done between Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting if there came to a point where there was going to be a leadership contest. Now, that was a big story that was on the agenda last week. But what I hear is rather different. What I hear is that actually Angela Rayner, if it came to it, and if Wes Streeting stood in a leadership contest, far from doing a pact with him, would actually stand against him.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think we're having the same conversations with people close to Angela Rayner. I mean, the way it was put to me was that she's been saying privately that she'd rather stick pins in her eyes than back Wes Streeting. I don't think that's particularly surprising. I mean, if you look at it from as if you'd woken up today and thought, what's the most obvious way to win the Labour leadership? Well, one, it is to have Angela Rayner on your side, or to be Angela Rayner, even in her slightly diminished position after having resigned from cabinet. And you see that from the frequency with which the Prime Minister himself is now saying, Angela's going to be back. I'd love to see Angela back. Angela's my favourite politician ever. Not something she ever reciprocates in the other direction, by the way, and that tells you where the power lies. But you just have to interrogate who Angela is, who Wes Streeting is, and who the people around them are to realise that isn't going to happen. So go back in time 10, 20 years. Think about people. Won't mean much to many listeners of this podcast, but the most important person in Angela Rayner world is a man called Nick Parrott. Used to work at Unite. Is sort of the Morgan McSweeney of that bit of the Labour Party. As they might say, with reference to the Mario games, he's Morgan McSweeney's Wario, or maybe Morgan McSweeney is Nick Parrott's Wario, right? They are very similar in terms of their peerless organisers. They know how to sort of command and control their bit of the party. And they are from completely different sort of bits of the Labour Party. And not just Nick Parrott, Angela Rayner as well, right? That is the union bit of the Labour Party. And they spent their entire political adolescence and youth organising against, sometimes being beaten by, sometimes beating the right of the Labour Party, the Blairite right of the Labour Party. And think about that bit of the party. Who are you looking at? You're looking at people like Wes Streeting. Culturally and politically, they're from entirely different traditions. And it's going to take much more than Wes Streeting getting up at conference and saying for applause, I love Angela. Angela's my mate. Let's have a round of applause for the GMB. Let's have a round of applause for Unison. I'm a proper union man. Because the history here runs deep. And I think it is a sort of going to be set up as a battle for supremacy over the Labour Party. And even as a marriage of convenience, because of all those quite profound differences and because of the long history these people have in the Labour Party, it's quite difficult to see that working. Because Wes's people aren't Nick Parrott's people, and Wes is not a Nick Parrott person or an Angela Rayner person.
We should talk about her strategy and how she's playing it. And looking at what she's doing, she is keeping all options very much open. So she's not saying no to Starmer and his offer to cabinet. Her intervention yesterday in the Commons was actually very constructive. So she stood up and she wants to bring forward employment rights legislation. But look, she would have a case. They have massively watered it down. They have breached some of the day one pledges. This was her baby. She made this legislation. She could have gone on the offensive and she didn't. It's all being done in quite a measured, quite constructive way. And it feels to me like she's giving herself the option of either a comeback via Keir Starmer through his cabinet if he survives, or the alternative, as we've discussed, going for it herself.
Yeah, she's boxing very clever on the employment rights bill stuff, because you could come out, you could accuse Keir Starmer of betraying you, but she's in a uniquely strong political position because every criticism she made internally, and she had dozens of meetings with officials, particularly at the department. Peter Kyle now runs the business department, where she said to officials, look, I know you want to water this down. And indeed they did, right? There was a groundswell of antipathy towards that legislation from other cabinet ministers, from government departments that thought it wasn't workable. And Angela Rayner has gone. Peter Kyle initially says we're committed to this thing in full. And then within a couple of months, yes, it was a compromise agreed by the unions and business, but what Angela Rayner predicted has come to pass. They've watered it down. One of its flagship provisions that they were always in public insistent they were committed to. So if you're her, you have that trump card. Well, hang on, I've left and you've done the thing you always said you weren't going to do, but also she's being constructive, keeping her powder dry. She has a very acute and sophisticated understanding of her own power and how it's best wielded, I think.
And she's very clever with how she does it as well. I mean, it was fascinating looking at the way in which she approached the kind of employment rights bill. If you look at any of those briefings about her putting down amendments, etc., none of it was done in her voice. It was all done through friends, through allies. And similarly, even this weekend, she let it be known that she's not happy with David Lammy's proposed jury trial reforms. It wasn't done again in her name. It was just quietly let known through allies, through friends, if it does come to pass, that she actually does end up standing in the race herself. And of course, as you were saying, Steve, that will partially, I think, come down to how the HMRC issues resolve themselves. Now, I'm told she hasn't actually received the instruction from HMRC yet as to whether she owes anything. That's still being gone through. And I think that once that's resolved, that might provide some clarity for her about what she might do in the future.
Yeah, but they have had to wait quite a while from HMRC now. And there is a world in which HMRC actually says there's something, effectively an honest mistake.
Yeah.
So it could say that you have no fine to pay. That is her best case scenario here. Her worst case scenario is you get a kind of a very significant fine that she may actually even struggle to pay. So there are different ways to this. But her, the people around her seem pretty confident it's likely to be on the lower end of the fine schedule. And until that's dealt with, she's got the risk that every time she says anything, she'll just get this tax investigation brought up again and again. It will be debilitating. So once that's out of the way, I think it is fair to start expecting speeches, big interviews. I imagine she'll be doing that kind of stuff, and more interventions. And all of that is in the run up to May, and all of the pressures that Starmer's under over that, and the kind of continued speculation about leadership, which, Patrick, you kicked off in dramatic style this week by revealing that Labour Together had been doing something behind the scenes.
Yeah, so let's remind ourselves of what Labour Together is. It was the think tank founded by several current members of the cabinet in the Corbyn years, among them Steve Reid, Shabana Mahmood, Lisa Nandy was involved to start with, not so much now, I think it's fair to say. People like Jim McMahon, Lucy Powell, people have always been in and around the top of the Starmer project. And in Steve Reid and Shabana Mahmood's case, have a legitimate claim to say, well, look, we helped make and maintain you as a sort of going concern for the Labour leadership. But they did something really interesting last weekend. I got a text on Sunday from a senior Labour figure saying, have you seen this? And they forwarded me an email from Labour Together to local constituency Labour parties and a link to a survey. And it basically said, please fill in this survey, 500 quid for any member who does it as part of a prize draw. Your local party can win a grand. So I thought, I wonder what this is asking. So I, on a couple of devices, accessed the survey, and it was asking me questions, who are you? What's your level of education? Where do you get your news? Then it started asking questions like, do you think it's more important for a Labour leader to have principles that they stick to, or compromise the principles to get things done? And I thought, hang on, I can see where this is going. And then all of a sudden you're presented with a page with 8 names on it. Keir Starmer, Andy Burnham, Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, Darren Jones, Lucy Powell, Shabana Mahmood. Oh God, I can't remember the other 2. That's really bad. Anyway, doesn't necessarily matter. Basically, there were 9 choices, one of whom was Keir Starmer, 8 of whom were members of the cabinet. Bridget Phillipson was another, and senior Labour figures, all of whom had been discussed for the leadership. Ed Miliband, I can't remember whether I said Ed Miliband or not. And it asks you a range of questions. 1, rank them in order of who you think can win a general election. 2, rank them in terms of your likelihood to vote for them in a leadership election. Then it ends with a series of hypothetical head-to-heads. So it says, imagine there's a leadership election tomorrow. Would you vote for Keir Starmer or Darren Jones? Would you vote for Wes Streeting or Shabana Mahmood? Would you vote for Shabana Mahmood or Angela Rayner? And what struck me about this survey, it's not a poll, it's a survey. It's a self-selecting survey with potential cash prizes. And, some Labour Together alumni said to me, at least when we did this, we did it properly and with rigorous methodology. What struck me was Keir Starmer's think tank, the Starmerite think tank, is putting around a survey, inviting party members, who of course will decide the next leader when that election comes, however soon, be it May or sooner, or sometime in 2027 or 2028. It's inviting them not only to say, here are 8 people potentially who are more likely to win the election than Keir Starmer, but by the end of the survey, it's accepting the premise not only that a leadership election is going to happen soon, but that it might not involve Keir Starmer at all. And it's that toxic question, I think, who can win the leadership election, which is the most provocative, because I don't think there are many Labour members right now who are looking at that survey thinking, Could Keir Starmer definitely win an election? Is he definitely more likely to win than Andy Burnham? Now, I should say what some people more sympathetic to this mission have said to me is, well, what they're clearly trying to do is get some data together that can furnish Number 10 with proof for what they've been trying to tell MPs, with what they briefed to me and others a couple of weeks ago, and then started a big war with Wes Streeting, which is that if you kick off a leadership election, Ed Miliband's going to be Prime Minister, Andy Burnham's going to be Prime Minister, we're going to veer to the left and it's going to be a complete disaster. Whatever the motivation, Labour Together's line is that we're being helpful. It is not helpful if you are so closely associated with Keir Starmer, if, as our colleague Sam Coates pointed out on his own podcast the other day, your advisory board contains such luminaries, and your board as Labour Together contains such luminaries as Sally Morgan, used to work in Number 10, Alan Milburn, very close to Wes Streeting, and a range of other Labour grandees, right? It's not helpful if you're that organisation to say, what we're going to do at this point when leadership speculation is running out of control, we're going to email tens of thousands of people, hundreds of local parties, and encourage them to fill out a survey that asks the very questions Number 10 is trying desperately to pretend aren't being asked, don't matter, are a distraction. The point at which Labour Together does that, one, it's definitely going to leak, and I'm the grateful recipient of that leak. And two, it's just completely explosive. So any sort of helpful intent was immediately overshadowed, blown out of the water, obliterated by the fact of the survey's existence, the questions they were asking. And also, inevitably, it means Keir Starmer faces another day. He was at McLaren's HQ on Monday. One of the questions he was asked was, is there any future for you as Prime Minister? And he has to say, no, I don't want to talk about internal Labour Party politics. Every cabinet minister on the radio, what do you think of this survey? Why aren't you in it? Who would you vote for out of those 9 people? It's a complete disaster.
And it's because there is blood in the water, right? And everyone can smell it in Westminster, everyone knows it. And that is why we're having all of these conversations. There is another aspect to it. There was a kind of very cruel meme that did the rounds of Keir Starmer at that event at McLaren, where he stood there and everyone in the audience was looking incredibly bored.
Including Pat McFadden, the working Pension Secretary.
And there is there's an argument that actually one of the things that's missing from politics at the moment is proper main character energy. The reason people are thinking about and writing about and talking about Angela Rayner is because, for all her faults, and obviously there were issues over her tax fares, all of those things, she does have personality. She's a big figure in Labour ranks. Wes Streeting, again, different strengths, different weaknesses, but he clearly has personality. And the lack of main character energy in the centre is meaning that we're all having these discussions about potential other people to go for the leadership.
I mean, you speak to any cabinet minister, virtually any of them will tell you that this is not going to go on much longer. I think there's a reticence from anybody to sort of wield the knife. And I feel that really acutely. So many people have said to me recently, I just wish people would stop whispering and somebody would put their head above the parapet. It's kind of getting annoying because, you can smell the sense of decay, but yet there's no purpose to it. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, about Sir Keir Starmer, I've seen him, I've talked to him, he's now doing the tea rooms, he's having people for breakfast, and he's a really nice chap. He'd be a fantastic foreign secretary. That job would suit him down to the ground and he'd probably do it very well. But as Prime Minister, as a leader, and that's what it comes down to, it's a question of leadership. He's just sort of lacking in so many ways. But Patrick, what I'm fascinated about what you said is that if the recipient of this information is supposed to be Downing Street, which, as you were saying, it creates a kind of really toxic situation anyway. I mean, we already have some of those answers by another story that you wrote last week, which was the polling of Labour members, which is notoriously difficult to do because you have to get through people that kind of understand that it's not voters. This is actually people who are members of the party. And when asked who they would like to see lead the party, actually the results were quite surprising, weren't they?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was really interesting. Well, it depends how surprised you are by the Labour leadership, the Labour membership appetite to forgive Ed Miliband for losing an election. Although
I told you he'd be in there.
Well, no, exactly.
I've been talking it up for weeks.
So this was a private YouGov poll done for a city consultancy called Blonde Money, which fell into my hands. And one, it's interesting, by the way, that people in the city are doing private polling of the Labour membership, trying to work out where this is going to go. But it was about the favourability of members towards certain Labour figures. And two really surprising things. Well, one unsurprising thing, which was that Ed Miliband had the highest favourability score of anyone.
55%.
55%. That's a big score. But the other thing that struck me, right, what's the conversation we all have with Labour people if we're talking about the leadership? Often Labour MPs will say to you, well, Wes is never going to win the membership. Wes can't win the membership. Wes is a Blairite. They think Wes is really right-wing. What struck me was, okay, Ed Miliband's on 55%. He is clearly the most popular Labour politician among the Labour membership, or certainly the Labour cabinet minister among the Labour membership. I think it's him and Andy Burnham are always up there. And, you look at any survey, be it self-selecting or a poll, that's pretty consistent. But in this YouGov poll, who was second in the favourability score? It was Wes Streeting. 55 for Ed Miliband, positive score, 49 for Wes Streeting. Just as a brief sidebar, by the way, Keir Starmer's numbers have collapsed 36 points in 3 months, from plus 33 to minus 3. That shows you what the membership think of Keir Starmer and how he's likely to do in that Labour Together survey if people are still filling it out. And that will, I think, one, if you're Wes Streeting looking at that, you will think, you know what, actually favourability is a different question to the leadership question. Me and Ed would be in a good position to be leader of the Labour Party. Members like us, it's a really good place for Wes Streeting to start from. So looking at that, you think, you'd fancy a crack at it if you're Wes Streeting.
Yeah, and I think he knows that Ed is the person to be most worried about. And there will be an enormous sort of amount of effort, I suspect, put into stopping Ed Miliband getting through to those membership rounds in voting. And actually, people around Wes Streeting say quite confidently that they don't think that Ed would get enough nominations from the PLP, because of course that's what you need to do first. But they are also sanguine in knowing that if he did sneak through to the membership, he is potentially the one person that could stop Wes Streeting from winning the leadership. Of course, not bringing into context Angela Rayner herself, which, perhaps we don't know, but that's what surprised me about the poll, was that she wasn't higher.
Well, Wes should be trying to get Ed on side, offer to make Ed your chancellor. I mean, we talk
There's
about
your splash
Angela
for Saturday, Steve.
Pact.
The pact.
Angela, people talk about Angela Rayner as the king or queen maker. I think Ed Miliband is also in that situation. Having him on your ticket might demonstrate a lack of credibility to pockets of the PLP, but I think it would just be a net benefit to anyone wanting to run for Labour leadership because of his popularity, and also he's one of the few effective ministers in this government.
It is incredibly debilitating for the Prime Minister. If you talk to Rishi Sunak, if you talk to Boris, any of the former Prime Ministers, they will say one of the hardest things is you get to this point where every conversation just turns into a conversation about your leadership and your failings. It is relentless.
And it immediately devalues anything you say as Prime Minister. What is the ultimate power a Prime Minister has? It's the office, it's the title. Yeah. So the point at which you could say, tomorrow I'm going to give everyone a free puppy. And then
you're free puppies.
Well, exactly. But
that might work for him, actually. It would in my household.
The first question we would ask is, but hang on, the rollout of this puppy scheme is 8 months, and you're not going to be here in 8 months, Keir.
Yeah. Totally debilitating.
And actually, you're only saying this, Keir, because Labour MPs want to chuck you out. So we can't trust you pledge of free puppies anyway.
Well, look, we're going to talk about how Keir Starmer tries to weather the next 5 months ahead of the local elections. It is going to be very difficult. Welcome back to The State of It, the political podcast from The Times and The Sunday Times. Now, we want to talk about what on earth is Keir Starmer going to do to try to turn this round. So let's not forget the task ahead here. It is a kind of Herculean task. He is incredibly unpopular. He has seen the biggest collapse in his own personal popularity ratings of any Prime Minister in history on record. The figures speak for themselves. So how does he turn it round? Well, he did an interview at the weekend in which he alighted on a new theme, which it feels like we're going to be hearing a lot about, which is young people. So he wants to appeal to young people. He wants to kind of do more to address the issues and barriers that they face in life. There is just one small problem with that strategy. We have just had a budget which overwhelmingly favoured older people. Where they put their money where their mouth is. We had the triple lock go up and massive tax rise on workers.
And it also made young people more difficult to hire because of the fiddling with the minimum wage and the abolition of reforms to the differential rates, and also hiking it altogether. It's more difficult than ever to hire young people. So
let's start by trying to give him the benefit of the doubt on it. What is the strategy here? Why is he trying to reach out to young people? What does he hope to achieve?
I'm going to say that I've been banging this drum now for months. I mean, I think it is completely ludicrous that a Labour Party is not throwing absolutely everything that it's got at young people. If you think about young people in this country post-COVID, there's a proliferation of mental health problems that are happening. Kids aren't going to school. There is nearly 1 million young people. I think we're going to see that threshold crossed fairly shortly, who are NEETs. That's not in education, employment or training. And if I were a Labour government, I can absolutely tell you that the first thing that I would be doing is making that my number one priority, which would be fighting for young people, trying to repair that social contract that's been broken between young people and political parties, particularly because of the lack of aspiration. You know, all of these young people, they're going to struggle to find a job. They're never, or they're certainly going to struggle to get on the housing ladder because the cost of living is now so substantial that getting that deposit to get that home is now really, really difficult. But I feel that instead of saying, do you know what, we're going to use this mission, this moral purpose to fix things for the next generation. And because of that, I'm really sorry to the pensioners. We're going to have to do something about your triple lot. You can't have your winter fuel payment, but because we're going to put all of that money into fixing things for the next generation, which personally, I think that the older generation would have some sympathy with because so many of us are parents or grandparents. But no, instead of doing that, they've done exactly as you were just saying, Patrick and Steve. In the budget, they've made it harder to employ young people. You know, employers are already frightened of employing people because of the Employment Rights Bill and some of the changes that are coming there. And if you talk to people around the Prime Minister, he says that this is the issue that lights him up like no other. But I see personally no real impetus behind this or momentum behind this. The announcements that we're expecting this week, which began with Pat McFadden on Sunday, I think we're going to see more tomorrow, where we see Lisa Nandy coming out and talking about support like new youth clubs and new purposeful activities for young people. That's great. That's all grist to the mill, but it's not going anywhere near where we need to be if we need to fix some of the problems for the younger generation. I say that as a parent of 3 children and a step-parent of 3 children, so 6 children. And I've said this to the Prime Minister, if he wants to come to my house, it's a petri dish. He can come and do his focus groups. He can speak to my children. They're differing ages, differing political perspective, experiences. But the fear that I have for all of them is that they are being let down and that the focus is not on them. And we really do risk a situation where we leave this generation worse off than those that came before it. And it really genuinely, sorry, I'll stop talking now, but you can possibly see I'm really perturbed by this and I'm really passionate about it. And I think it's a really, really big issue and a really big missed opportunity.
Well, firstly, Caroline for Prime Minister. Secondly, the phrase that stood out for me there, Caroline, well, 2 of them. You spoke about the Prime Minister saying this is the thing that lights him up, that gets him going. And the other phrase you used was his moral and political purpose. Now, what they're clearly trying to do with all this talk, not much of it substantiated by a coherent policy programme, as you're saying, is trying to remind people that the Prime Minister does have a purpose, that this is the thing he cares about, that actually the reason he did the 2-child cap in the budget last week or a couple of weeks ago wasn't just because the PLP were kicking and screaming, because he really cares about young people's life chances and making sure everyone has the best start in life. I mean, that's fine, but it's not an easy thing for them to do midstream, particularly when over the past year we've been told he is, the Prime Minister who's all about security. And he spends a lot of his time speaking to world leaders about Ukraine, as he's been doing in Number 10 this week, to that effect. He's been banging on about immigration. He's been banging on about growth. So, it's great that we're now being told by the Prime Minister with his sleeves rolled up in the Observer that he's all about young people. But 5 minutes ago, he was about something else. And 5 minutes later, it'll be about something else. If, his new communication strategy, which is trying to explain a little bit more why he's doing this stuff, why he believes this stuff. He's launched a TikTok channel. Like me, he's launched a Substack to explain in further detail why he does stuff in his own voice, or at least with a very good ghostwriter. Maybe this is the thing he will stick to, but he's found that difficult in the past. Number 10 have found that difficult in the past. So maybe this is a new style of Starmer and Starmerism that is, endowed with the most elusive quality of all, which is consistency. But I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath on that.
The comm strategy is interesting in and of itself. We've hit this period, again, I remember this under successive Tory Prime Ministers as well, where they're getting a really rough ride in the papers, right? And on TV and all the main broadcasters. So they try to go straight to the voters. And this one is doing it. Rachel Reeves has had loads of influencers into number 11. Starmer's doing a similar approach. And they are trying to go directly to the YouTubers, to people online to try to sell their message. The challenge, again, is they don't always say the things that they'd like them to say. But that certainly seems to be the strategy, to try to cut out, how do they frame it? Well, we want to cut out the 11 political editors out there and just go straight to the people.
It feels to me a little bit sort of disingenuous that if you get that kind of response from the mainstream media, a bit like a kind of petulant toddler who gets a no from one parent, they kind of go, oh, well, I'll just go and ask the other parent instead. It feels a bit like that to me.
The problem, I think the more fundamental problem with all of it is this. Tony Blair used to have a sort of very elegant Blairish insult for Gordon Brown's approach to policy making, which was, Gordon is obsessed with announceables, right? Every Gordon Brown speech had to have an announceable policy in it, right, that was contrived for the moment. The problem is Keir Starmer is all about announceables, but the announceable is always, I told you these are my values last week, but actually this is the thing I really, really, really believe in now. They're not bad or ill-advised ideas in of themselves. Actually, they're quite good ideas. It's the sort of thing Nigel Farage has been doing on TikTok for a long time. Zach Polanski, the Green leader, is a master at it. Personally, I find Labour MPs doing it a little bit cringe, but there are lots of sort of Labour MPs from the 2024 intake who've been doing this sort of thing, explaining directly using short form video, which is the thing everybody consumes. But for Keir Starmer, a leader with a reputation for inauthenticity, who's deeply unpopular, who's not a particularly fluent communicator in front of a camera, the Substack thing is actually quite a good idea because it doesn't require him to do any of those things. The short form video, TikTok, influencers, I'm not entirely sure that's Keir Starmer's medium. It's sort of, he's increasingly looking a bit like, a television politician in a digital age. He's frozen in a generation he was too busy being a lawyer to take part in and has come into politics at the wrong time. That's my sort of fatalistic reading of it, but I may well be wrong.
One thing we can expect, I think, some noise on in coming months, it's one of the few slithers of good news out there, is that we are about to get another interest rate cut. There are suggestions there'll be 2 more cuts early next year. And if number 10 and number 11 get behind that and start to kind of talk up that, we are now at a stage where mortgage rates are below the Liz Truss. We've gone full circle to start the show. Below just before Liz Truss's premiership when they shot up. So that is actually a moment. That is a kind of 3 years on. We are back to where we were. And if you were a kind of deft on that at number 10, number 11, you could try to claim some credit for that and galvanise it. The problem they've got is that voters don't trust them on the economy at all. And that's one of the issues where they've plummeted in the polls. But that is certainly, there's a slither of good news around the corner that I imagine they'll be trying to make hay out of.
Well, it's interesting though, our colleague Tom Calver, data editor of the Sunday Times, wrote a fascinating piece in last weekend's Sunday Times, the Sunday Times just gone, saying actually high interest rates have become actually weirdly popular, despite what the government would think, because people like saving. Since COVID, we've become a nation of savers. People like seeing their bank balances grow. They like putting money in an ISA. So maybe actually the combined assault on the ISA limit by Rachel Reeves, plus saying interest rates have been cut, will actually be a classic example of their reverse Midas touch and people hate them for it. Who knows?
I'd love to meet these people that can cope with higher mortgage payments and save. But there we go. But I take your point, Steve. I think what you're saying is, the whole idea behind the way in which they've choreographed this government is that the good news comes later. That they do the tough stuff at the beginning and then things come good at the end. But look, I can certainly already see a number of kind of looming sort of thorny issues for them on the horizon. If David Lammy's justice proposals come in, we've already starting to see a number of Labour MPs coming out, and Carl Turner, who has been taking to Twitter like a storm, opposing these measures, even going as far as to say that not only will he stand against David Lammy on these proposals in the chamber. He will walk through the division chamber with the opposition when these come to Parliament, and will then, if they get defeated, call for David Lammy's resignation, which is pretty punchy stuff.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, the subtext of that, Caroline, he's talking about dozens of MPs, as you say, signing his letter. He's been very strikingly critical of the Chief Whip, Johnny Reynolds.
Yes.
He went on Times Radio on Sunday and went for Johnny Reynolds. But if you're Carl Turner and you're saying, look what I've just done. I've organised dozens of people to rebel on a policy issue. I'm going for the Chief Whip, etc., etc. Is it a hop, skip and a jump from that to imagine that actually what you're proving is that 80 MPs can materialise like that if they're really angry with the government, as so many of them are? And what's 80 the magic number for? A leadership contest. Now, I'm not saying Carl Turner is the stalking horse, but it's an interesting case study in how out of nowhere, Carl Turner's been around for a long time.
It was exactly that. We suddenly got to over 100.
Really quickly.
In a couple of weeks.
And also, he's not one of the serial rebellers. Carl Turner has never voted against the government in his life. He was a shadow Attorney General. He was then a shadow Solicitor General. He hasn't been given a job in this government, which perhaps they'll regret now. But it does just prove that, these issues can be lightning conductors really, really quickly. And again, I can see another one on the horizon as well, which is this puberty blockers trial. Yeah. There was a meeting with Wes Streeting and Hilary Cass last week, which was attended by a cross-party group of MPs. Rosie Duffield coordinated a letter, not because it was going to be signed by masses and masses of people, because there were lots of people who I think would have signed it but didn't. But she wanted to show that there was cross-party opposition to it, that it's not just the Tories led by Kemi Badenoch who are opposing it. And this is something, again, if you look on Twitter, it's being massively weaponised out there against the government as being, how on earth can this government support the effective, as they describe it, the experimentation of children?
Yeah. So a whole panoply of problems, all to come before you get to May.
And we haven't even talked about Europe.
We haven't talked about Trump. We haven't talked about Europe. It is a difficult period, to put it mildly. Right, I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode of The State. We can continue. You can contact us on our email address, which is thestateofit@thetimes.co.uk. We want to hear from you, and we look forward to hearing from you next week. Patrick, would you just like to get out the big shiny red button?
Yeah, in Gabriel's absence, I'll do his constitutional role of thanking our excellent producers, Molly Guinness and Euan Dawtrey, for making us sound good, cleaning up our profanities and making the whole thing sing.
It's been an absolute delight as always, and thank you for listening.